Welcome everybody to the Nightlight Astrology Fall Speaker Series. My name is Michelle Corbusier. I'm one of Adam's teaching assistants at Nightlight Astrology. And before introducing today's guests, I'd like to take a moment for a short introduction to the speaker series. So today we will have our second talk of the fall edition. And this season, as every season, we're letting our students at Nightlight Astrology discover and enjoy different voices in the astrological community, inviting wonderful guests who cover a variety of topics of interest. And Adam's goal is also to make high quality education available to a broad public. And these webinars are made possible thanks to everyone who contributes to Adam's yearly Kickstarter campaign. So on behalf of Adam and the rest of the Nightlight staff, I want to give a big thanks to everyone who is supporting Adam's Kickstarter. And by the way, I think the next one will start in about a month from now. So I'm just going to share my screen, and my screen isn't ready. Just a moment. Yes, there we go. Let me share the page, nightlightastrology.com. If you go to the events page, you will see the lineup of this series. And I am just going to let you know that Saffron's talk, which was last week, you can still watch the replay. And it's going to be there up until tomorrow, I think. So if you haven't seen it, do catch this. It was a great talk about the 12 parts. And tomorrow, Cassandra Tyndall will be our guest, and she'll present her practical approach to the fixed stars. And today, I am very happy to welcome Mercy Morales, who will be talking about orbital progressions. Please allow me first to read Mercy's biography for a moment. So Mercy is a professional astrologer living in Austin, Texas. She considers herself to be an eclectic astrologer, pulling wisdom from many different lineages, and is devoted to helping others deepen their self-awareness through the lens of astrology. She's the mother of 3 grown children and the grandmother of 2. As a Cancer rising, Leo sun, Virgo moon gal, she loves working alongside individuals, couples, and families as they explore fundamental energies and the cycles of life. Metaphysics have been a point of interest since she was a child. For the last 30 years, she has explored ancient philosophies and practices such as meditation, yoga, Ayurveda, and Reiki, beginning her deep dive into astrology in 2012. And then in 2021, she discovered an intriguing timing technique that could be categorized as a sister technique to secondary progressions. That sounds so interesting. Since then, she has been doing research and authoring Orbital Progressions, a revolutionary timing technique. Okay, that sounds awesome. Or do you say it revolutionary timing technique or our evolutionary?
Revolutionary timing technique, yeah.
So, well, that's great. Well, there's just one last thing that I want to do before we get started. It's just I want to ask everyone to please put any general comments that you have in the chat box or questions for me. You can put that in the chat box. But any questions that you have for Mercy, please share them in the Q&A box. We will looking at those after the talk, and we're going to take some time to go through these questions depending on how much time we have. So over to you, Mercy, please go ahead.
All right. Thanks so much, Michelle. And I'll share my screen here. And I'd also like to say thanks to Adam for taking a chance on me and a technique that no one really knows anything about yet. And also thank you to everyone that's shown up here to learn what orbital progressions are. I'll go ahead and ask for a little bit of grace here. This is my first presentation, and I'm definitely not used to talking to my computer. So, we only have Mars and Mercury opposing Jupiter on eclipse day. So no pressure. But honestly, it's really a really great aspect to dive into a new astrological topic. So let's look at what we are going to be talking about today. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about what progressions are in general, and then we're going to talk about what orbital progressions are specifically, and some of the similarities and differences between orbital progressions and secondary progressions. What are some of the benefits of using orbital progressions in your readings? And then we'll get into some of the case studies and questions at the end. All right. So what are progressions? And fundamentally, we would say that progressions are timing techniques used to track our growth throughout this incarnation. And as we all know, from that moment we take our first breath, we're pretty much bombarded with stimuli, and we're gathering data and information that could only be causing expansion within ourselves. And we know as astrologers that there has to be a way to track this in our chart, because our charts are always mirroring our reality. And, theoretically, this is what progressions are. And what we're really talking about when we are using progressions is evolutionary astrology. And this isn't Jeffrey Wolf Green evolutionary astrology, although I completely respect and appreciate that branch of astrology. We are more talking about the mechanism through which we're watching evolution unfold in a chart. And so progressions show us in real time who the person in front of us is and where they're at in their journey. If we can imagine for a moment the face on a traditional clock, then we know that the minute hand is turning, and that is keeping track of one cycle. And it's determining the rate of movement for the hour hand, which is turning more slowly, and it's keeping track of a different cycle. And this is how progressions work, right? So we have the transiting planets that are moving more quickly, and those are determining the slower rate of motion for the progressed planets. So there's the simultaneous action happening between the two cycles. And we know that, we're in a universe where it's cycles within cycles within cycles. All right. So, of course, the concept of progressions is not a new one. And when we look back through history, we can see a mention of progressing the sun a degree a year from Vedius Valens. Kepler was also noted to use this, and Placidus is actually credited with creating secondary progressions as a more complete method. And in addition to secondary progressions, there, of course, are other progression techniques, and they each offer a valid and interesting perspective. And today, the progression technique that we're going to be talking about is just the next in line of being discovered. And this is really a sister technique to secondary progressions, and it's called orbital progressions. And it's not intended to disprove or be more accurate than any of the other progression methods. We're simply looking at it as a great addition to our astrological toolbox. All right, so getting to orbital progressions and what these are. Orbital progressions are progressions that are calculated by taking into account the authentic rate of movement or orbit of each planet as it spirals the sun. And the rate at which we progress the sun in a chart, 1 degree a year, is used as a constant across multiple progression methods. And we're going to use it as a constant within orbital progressions as well. And collectively, as human beings, we've pretty much agreed that 1 lap of the Earth around the sun represents accurately a year in our life. And so based on this, then wouldn't it make sense to progress the other planets by their average rate of orbit around the sun as well? And as we get into the charts, then it's going to become clear that orbital progressions are tracking just as accurately as the progressed sun. All right. So let's look at what are some of the similarities and some of the differences between orbital progressions and secondary progressions. And I actually, in my book, wherever I provide charts, I'll provide an orbitally progressed chart and a secondary progressed chart, because after all of my research, I've found that what they really do is validate each other. And so they work really well together. And in orbital progressions, there are some differences, of course. And so orbital progressions are calculated using a mean calculation. So they're based on an average rate of movement, where secondary progressions are based on a true calculation. And because of this, retrogrades are factored in to that mean calculation, to that averaged rate. So we don't actually see planets in retrograde with orbital progressions like we do in secondary progressions. And when we're figuring orbital progressions, we're just using a little bit of basic math. And with secondary progressions, we are using an ephemeris. In orbital progressions, we also are keeping the ascendant where it is. So we are not progressing the ascendant, but rather we're using it as an anchor point in the chart, because that moment that we take our first breath never changes in this life. So we're going to hold that there. Excuse me. As we go on, a little side note, we are not going to get into the specific calculations to figure orbital progressions. They are in the book if you're interested. And hopefully sooner rather than later, they'll be available on an app or within other astrological software. All right. So why would we want to incorporate orbital progressions into our readings? Well, they reveal development over time. So they are going to allow for a deeper understanding of one's current evolved character and life experiences. They're going to pinpoint significant life events. So they're going to make known important turning points or key events in a person's life. Orbital progressions are going to help us fine-tune our predictive accuracy. So they'll offer a more complete picture through which we can gauge opportunities and challenges that are on the horizon. They're going to expose subtle influences. So they'll reveal latent potentials, hidden strengths, and evolving desires that may not be immediately evident in the chart. And, I can speak for myself, and maybe some of you guys have had this experience as well, where you have someone sitting across from you, or you're doing a reading, and they're telling you about a really significant life event. And you're looking at their chart, and you would almost expect to see a more profound aspect. But of course, we can always see through other aspects in the chart because there are many aspects present. But once we look at the progressions, well, lo and behold, it lights up an aspect that you would almost expect to see. So orbital progressions are also going to offer us some psychological insight. So they'll reveal shifts in self-perception, emotional responses, and psychological growth since birth. And they're going to bring clarity when we're looking at charts in synastry. So they'll really show us the changing dynamics between individuals over time and offer some insight into the evolution of that partnership. All right. So now the fun part, now we're going to get into some of these case studies. And I just want to take a little side note here. We are not going to go into a lengthy analysis of these charts. The focus is on timing here. So our goal is to get through as many charts as we can, so we can see how these progressions track time and time again. And so we can recognize this as a legit timing technique. And so first up, we're looking at the chart of Rick Levine, who is a scholar and an author and, of course, an astrologer of decades. He's also very Uranian and funny. He has me laughing every time I listen to him. He is very into, science and physics and metaphysics. And as the daughter of a physicist, I really appreciate this approach. I can't tell you how many times I've laid in bed at night just trying to piece it all together, how astrology is interplaying with physics. And it's kind of like, God, how is this all working, man? And Rick actually, he loves to explain how it's all working. And there is a YouTube video actually that I really love of his, and I want to say it's called The Nodes in Quantum Astrology. And it is fascinating, and it's really the most scientifically accurate explanation of the nodes I've ever heard. So, if you're a physics or metaphysical junkie, you might really appreciate this. But anyway, let's get into his chart. So Rick is almost 69. At the time, he receives the International Astrologer of the Year award. And he is in India when he receives this award. And so what do we see in the chart that would reflect that? I should also note before we get rolling on these charts that I have placed the orbitally progressed planets around the outer wheel, and I'll be referring to these as OP planets. So in Rick's chart here, we see that he has OP Mercury conjunct OP Jupiter, and these are in his 9th house, so a house of foreign travels, in the sign of Aquarius. And, I believe that the lecture he gave at this event was a lecture on fate and free will. So, a very 9th house topic. If we look across his chart, we'll notice that down here in Leo, he has OP Venus at 4 degrees. So this is an exact opposition. And OP Venus is actually in trine to his natal Mercury. And OP Mercury and OP Jupiter are sextiling that natal Mercury as well in the 11th house. What else do we have? We have the OP part of fortune at 24 degrees in Scorpio, and transiting Jupiter is conjunct. And these are trining Chiron up here in his 10th. And I looked back through all of the information I could find on Rick. And I was looking to see if he had won any other major awards, and I couldn't find any, and I could be totally wrong, but I couldn't find any up until this point. So, perhaps what we're seeing here is an astrologer that's finally receiving some recognition for all of his years of, service and practice. And, just speculation. I'm not sure. We'll have to ask Rick there. But he also won a Fomalhaut Award. And I believe that was just a few months after this, or potentially the next year. With progressed planets, they move really slow. So sometimes we'll see multiple events that happen, a little distance apart, falling under the same categories. He has OP Mars at 18 degrees. And that, has this transiting Pluto over here in Capricorn, trining it. So, that in this chart, we can see that's pretty indicative of a weighty accomplishment. And another nice point of interest on this chart is also that the lunar eclipse that was on July 27th in 2018 was exactly at 4 degrees Aquarius. So exactly conjunct that OP Mercury and OP Jupiter. All right, so let's move on to our next chart. Carl Sagan. I'm sure many of you as astrologers know who Carl Sagan is. Just in case you don't, he was an astronomer and a planetary scientist and a cosmologist and an astrophysicist, an astrobiologist, an author, a professor, a science communicator. I loved that one when I saw that on the lineup. And he actually created a plaque that was launched into space that basically described who human beings are. We have 2 strands of DNA. We're bipedal, and you can find us on the third rock from the sun. He worked in, let's see, what else did he do? He worked with the SETI project, which is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. He wrote the book Contact, which turned into the movie Contact. And he was working with that movie to make it as scientifically accurate as it could possibly be up until he died. And he also created a television series called Cosmos. And that is what this chart is for. It is for the release date of Cosmos. And he is almost 46 at the time. And for decades, Cosmos was the most widely watched series ever in the history of American public televisions. And it won a slew of awards. And I know that there were a couple of Emmys in there as well. So let's look at his chart and see what we can see that would reflect this. So he's got OP Venus up here at 28 degrees in the 9th house, Capricorn. And of course, that's a house of broadcasting. And that is being trined by transiting Jupiter here in the 5th. And his ascendant would be the 3rd leg of that trine. And the other grand trine was between his OP moon, which is at 6 degrees in his 10th house, Aquarius. And that moon is conjunct his natal MC and North Node. That moon is trining OP Mars down here in the 6th. And we can see that transiting Saturn and the sun are there. And then we can also see the third point of that trine is with OP, part of fortune, in Gemini, which is conjunct his natal Chiron. And he seems to be somebody who would have really felt like he wasn't serving his purpose had he not been able to connect with and educate the masses on space. Let's see, what else was going on at his life this time? He was, in 1980, he appeared on the cover of Time magazine, and he was really reaching his height of public fame. And so, coming back up here to that OP Venus, it is on the 10th house cusp, and of course, trining his ascendant. And let's see what else is going on. Oh, also at this time, not, well, actually it is involved in cosmos, and here's why. With this OP Venus, we see that that is across from his natal Pluto. And at the time he was creating cosmos, he was divorcing his second wife, and he was about to remarry his third wife. And she is actually who he created cosmos with. And so, if we come up here and we see OP Juno at 18 degrees in Capricorn, then we'll notice that that is in a trine with OP Mercury and OP Pallas as well in his chart. All right, so I think that is it for Carl. Let's go ahead and go to the next chart. All right. So this is the chart for Frida Kahlo. And she was a Mexican painter, best known for her magical realist folk style. And she also had a lot of autobiographical elements in her work as well. And if you know her life story, it's pretty easy to understand why. This chart is actually for a day that was possibly the most pivotal day in her life. And on this day, she was commuting home on a bus, and a trolley ended up hitting the bus. And it actually sent a metal rod through her abdomen into her spine, which of course caused serious internal damage and psychological trauma, and it left her unable to have children as well. And so, if we come over here and we look at OP Moon in her chart, and it's right here with OP Vesta. And that is, a little bit wider conjunction than I would normally consider, but it's conjunct her natal Pluto. And this OP Moon is also in conjunct her natal Mars in the 6th. And it's also being squared by a lineup of transiting planets that we can see down here in Virgo. And so we see, there's the transiting moon and Mars, and the sun is there as well. So those are in the 3rd house. And as it is in most cases where there is a challenge in her life, there is a golden nugget, right? And so we can see that she has OP Venus here at 27 degrees. Well, you know what? Before we do that, actually, let's go ahead and look at this 12th house, 6th house axis. And we'll notice that OP Venus is there at 23 degrees. And if we look directly across the chart, we see that OP Mars is exactly at 23 degrees in her sixth house. And if we look a little bit closer, we'll notice that her natal nodes are exactly at 23 degrees as well. And these are actually in a T-square with OP Mercury down here in the third house, right? So she's commuting home and she has this horrible accident, but it's highly pivotal. And looking for, that gift that this accident gave her, we can see that she's got this OP Venus and it's conjunct her OP part of fortune. And those are trining her natal Saturn and natal Eris. And transiting Uranus is trining those as well. So, she's had this really shockingly brutal accident. And what it has done is it's awakened her passion for painting. And so, while she's literally confined to bed, very 12th house, her father installs a mirror over her bed so that she can start to paint self-portraits. Let's see. There's also a grand trine between, let's see, what is that grand trine between? The OP moon up here and her natal Chiron here, and OP Mercury down here as well. And, in hindsight, this is really the beginning of her career as an artist. And so we have Mars here in exaltation in Capricorn, her sixth house. And if we go back over here to OP Venus, we will see that, OP Venus Venus is the ruler of her 10th house. And that's conjunct her natal Jupiter. And it's also exactly sextile her MC at 23 degrees of Taurus. And, at the time of the accident, she also happened to be with her boyfriend, who she was very much in love with. And within a few months of this accident, I believe it's because his family moved to another country, they ended up breaking up and he moved away. So that's another layer to this OP Venus, OP Mars opposition, and, in T-square to Mercury that's down here in Libra in the third. And this accident actually aligned her with what she would be most valued for in life. And what we see is OP part of fortune at 27 degrees of Cancer. And the eclipse that year in 1925 on July 20th, it was a solar eclipse and it was exactly at 27 degrees Cancer. All right, let's move on. All right, so here we are with the chart of Snoop Dogg. And this is going to be a fun one because not only are we looking at one chart for Snoop, we are going to look at another chart. So this first chart is very early in his career, and the second chart is going to be for where he is now. So we're really going to be able to see these progressions as they track through one individual's life. For those of you who don't know who Snoop is, he is an American actor. And this chart is for the release of his first album, which is called Doggy Style. And of course, if you come over here and you see OP, oh, sorry, guys. You see OP Venus and OP Moon in the 8th house. Like, how could it be called anything else, right? And at the time, he is actually having 2 major events go on in his life. And he is recording this album. And he's also simultaneously going through a murder trial. And so, you know, life was a little bit intense. And the label of this album was actually Death Row Records. And I think, you know, the single from the album may have been Murder Was the Case. And so what in this chart reflects that? Well, let's just start here with OP Mars in Pisces. And that is squaring his natal Neptune and natal Jupiter in Sagittarius 8th house. And we can see that there are also all of these transiting planets there as well. So, you know, we have the transiting sun and the nodes and his MC and Mars. And there's also OP Moon that is in square as well. He would end up being acquitted for murder. And I want to say maybe his bodyguard kind of lost it and ended up firing the shots. So, you know, he's going to be acquitted. And so again, we can come up to this OP Mars, and we can also see that, you know, that is trining his natal Mercury. And transiting Jupiter here is trining that OP Mars. And he's also got Venus or OP Venus and OP Moon here in the sign of Sagittarius as well. The lunar eclipse in 93 was at 13 degrees Sagittarius. And so that was conjunct this OP Venus. And let's see, you know, OP Venus at the time is also sextiling his natal Uranus in the 6th. And so that's an interesting effect there, because he is really got all of the eyes, you know, watching him in this trial and following him. And so he's gained a lot of popularity, and his album comes out, and it's his first album, but it debuts at, you know, #1. I think that was worldwide, and it ended up selling many millions of copies. And we can see that, you know, this Mercury, OP Mercury Vesta combo up here in his 6th house, in his 10th house at 6 degrees. These are conjunct his North Node. Let's see what else we got going on in here. And, you know, this OP Mercury is also sextiling his natal Neptune and Jupiter. He's also got OP part of fortune at the time that is in Taurus, and it is conjunct his ascendant. It is opposing his natal Mercury, and we have transiting Jupiter in opposition to natal OP, to OP part of fortune as well. And Another thing that he had going on in his life was his wife, Shantae, was pregnant with his first son. And in an interview I saw where his, he was kind of mentioning that what was weighing most heavily in his mind at the time was, am I going to be able to be a father to my child? Like, am I going to be able to watch my little person grow up? And we can see that reflected in the fact that he's got OP moon over here in the 8th, and that is squaring this OP Mars in Pisces. And, it's a T-square too, because he's got transiting Chiron in there as well. And another thing that we would notice would be that OP Ceres is in his 4th house, Leo, at 15 degrees. And that is in an exact square with his natal moon. And, but he also has this grand trine going on with OP moon here. And that's between the moon and his natal Ceres and his natal Chiron and part of fortune, right? So he would be able to watch his child grow up. All right, so now we're going to flash forward 29 years later. And we have Snoop Dogg now. And, he's almost 51 and he's singing a whole new tune. He's had a lot of spiritual growth, and he's really showing up for his community, and he's showing up as a positive role model for kids. And it's really just a beautiful evolution, right? And so this chart is for a song that is called Doggyland Affirmations. And while this is a song, I believe a few days before was actually the launch of his Doggyland YouTube channel. So, here he is. He's created this platform that teaches children respect and personal empowerment and values and, cognitive fundamentals as well. And I had to laugh because I found out about this because my grandson had come home from school and I was hanging out with him, and he was really into singing this song, and I'm listening to the lyrics and I'm like, wow, all right, yeah, oh, it's totally awesome. Who sings this song? And he looks at me, in his little 6-year-old voice, and he's like, Snoop Dogg. And so on that note, I was like, I'm gonna need to go look at his chart. Astrologers were such creepers, man. But so anyway, that brought me to find this chart, and let's look at what some of those affirmations are in this song. So he's saying, my feelings matter and I care about others, right? And so we can see that here is the OP moon up here in 5 degrees, Capricorn, 9th house, Saturnian ruled. So here he's preaching morals to children. And that is, let's see, that is sextiling his natal Mercury. A little bit wider orb, that Venus is there too. Another affirmation from that song is, every day I get better, right? So striving for excellence every day, right? And we can see that he's got this OP Mars over here in the 11th. And that is trining his natal moon. Let's see. And he's also got OP Mercury down here in Gemini. And, the part of fortune is right there as well. And those are conjunct his natal Saturn and Pallas. And they are in a trine with his natal Pluto, and transiting Mercury is there as well. And those are trining this OP Venus up here in his 10th. Let's see what else there is. OP Jupiter is coming into an exact trine with his natal Ceres in the 4th house, which is Leo. And, this is really a reinvention of his career. And so if we come up here and we see that here is OP Vesta at 14 degrees in his 10th, well, that's in an exact trine with his natal Uranus there. And the third point to that would be Pallas, OP Pallas down here at 14 degrees in Gemini. And another thing that is going on in his life right now is his marriage is really in a beautiful place. And so we can see that OP Juno down here in Libra is in a trine with OP Mercury. And, I actually looked back to see what was going on when that OP Juno was first coming into conjunction with that natal Pluto right there. And interestingly enough, he filed for divorce, but, it never transpired. And instead, they healed their relationship and ended up renewing their vows. So, what a beautiful path of Juno through the depths of Pluto. All right, moving on. And here we have Margot Robbie. And she is an Australian actress. And now she's probably best known for her role as Barbie. And, it's interesting when you're looking at the chart of an actor or an actress at the time they're playing a character, because it's almost like, where does one end and one begin? They kind of meld together. So, maybe we should just call her like Margot Barbie for the chart here. And she also owns the production company that produced Barbie. And I was laughing when I read the company's motto, because if it's not a fuck yes, then it's a no. And when you look at her natal chart, you just laugh, because that is just so, natal Mars in Aries in the 10th, right? All right, so Margot is 33 at the time, and we can understand that, Barbie has now elevated her to a whole new level, and we see OP Venus here, and that is trining her 10th house cusp. And then we can also see that OP Mars up here in her 11th house, Mars being the ruler of her 10th, is exactly conjunct her MC. And in fact, if we think back to the solar eclipse that was on April 30th in 2022, that was at 10 degrees of Taurus. So conjunct this OP Mars and her MC. And if you've seen the movie, then it's kind of this over the top, like bold, imaginative production. So again, we're looking at OP Venus, trining, transiting Neptune up here. And in the movie, Barbie is, she has this psychological crisis that leads her to question her world, her, existence in general, and equality, and, record scratch death. And so if we come over here and we look at OP Mars again, well, that is being squared by the progressed sun. And it's also in a square with OP Ceres, which is really interesting because if you know the mythology behind Ceres, well, Persephone is having to navigate two different worlds. And that's exactly what Barbie is doing in the movie as well. We can see that, this OP Mars is also trining her natal Uranus, the ruler of the eighth there. And OP Venus is also being opposed by transiting Pluto. And, I want to say that she pocketed probably like $50 million just for her role in this movie. And when we look at when she was in production of this movie, which would have been the year before, this OP Venus would have been at 0 degrees Leo. And that was when transiting Pluto was at 0 degrees Aquarius. So right there on that second house, 8th house axis. Let's see. Barbie, as like the movie is of course preaching the trials and tribulations of being a woman. And we can see that this OP Venus is squaring her natal moon. It's also squaring her, the transiting nodes at this time. What else do we have here? OP Venus is also in a trine with that OP moon in the 6th. And there's also a feminine grand trine going on between this OP Mercury here in the 5th and transiting Neptune and her ascendant and the transiting sun at the time. Let's see what else there is. There's also actually another trine that we can see between OP Pallas and her natal moon and transiting Saturn. And, her husband is actually a partner in that production company. And she's got OP Juno that is conjunct her natal part of fortune and Pluto. And that's being opposed by transiting Jupiter here in the 11th. And I looked back and her husband got married actually right when the OP Juno was coming into an exact conjunction with her natal Pluto. All right, we have 3 charts left. And here we are at Zoe Saldana. And she's an American actress who starred in 4 of the top grossing movies of all time, which is always good for the bank account. She, is in Star Trek. This chart is for the release of Star Trek. And, within a few months of this release was also the release of Avatar. So we're going to, hey, when that happens. So we're going to be referencing both movies here. And Star Trek is really what kind of kicked off this blockbuster movie spree for her. So she's 31 at the time. And all of the movies that are in this, are sci-fi. And all of her characters are pretty much intelligent female badasses who happen to be aliens. So if we come down here and we look at her OP Venus, which is, still conjunct to that OP Mars, it's being opposed by transiting Uranus. And we can also see that she's got this OP Mercury down here in Scorpio, and that is exactly conjunct her natal Uranus. And let's see. What else do we see here? These are, that OP Mercury is also trining her natal Jupiter, and transiting Pallas is there as well. And so Star Trek and Avatar not only bring her the fame and recognition, but they put her on the path to gargantuan wealth. And we can see that there is a grand trine here between this OP Mars and, Venus. The OP Venus is down there as well. And we have the transiting sun, and, the third leg there is her natal part of fortune. And we can also see that the OP part of fortune over here has transiting Jupiter, conjuncting it. And, it's a little bit wider orb, but OP part of fortune, we could say, within the scope of trining her natal sun as well. And let's come down here to this transiting Saturn. And you can't tell here because, well, this is a black and white chart, but Saturn had already made one pass and was in retrograde motion and about to station for its third pass across OP Mars and OP Venus here. And Avatar ended up winning 10 awards that were literally called the Saturn Awards. So I found that to be pretty interesting. All right. Let's go ahead and continue on. So here's Pedro Pascal. You may recognize him. He is a Chilean actor, Chilean American actor, I should say. And he was in, let's see, what was he in? He was in Game of Thrones and The Mandalorian, Wonder Woman, and this movie, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. So this chart is for the premiere of that movie. And he's 47 at the time. And with the release of this movie, he's peaking in popularity. And so we'll see that he has OP Venus here at 2 degrees in Leo. And that is trining his natal Jupiter in the 10th. And of course, trining that 10th house cusp there as well. And, you know, if you think back to Margot Robbie's chart, she had that aspect as well. And they also actually share another aspect or a couple of aspects too. So it's pretty interesting because they're both blowing up at the time, you know, they have these aspects. So yeah, astrology. And so let's see. At this time, he is dubbed most popular actor on the internet. And we can see that, you know, he's got the OP moon here in Aquarius, and that is conjunct his natal Mars, and we have transiting Saturn here and Vesta. The solar eclipse, you know, on April 30th, again, like in Margot Robbie's chart, was at 10 degrees of Taurus. She had it with OP Mars, and Pedro has it with OP part of fortune. Let's see, what else do we have on Pedro? He's got OP Mars here in Pisces, and OP Mars is conjunct his natal part of fortune. And we can see that, you know, the transiting part of fortune and Venus are there as well. And this OP Mars is sextiling his natal Venus, and transiting Uranus is sextiling that OP Mars as well. Let's see what else. OP Mercury down here in Libra at 11 degrees is opposing his natal sun. And while this movie was in production the year before, he actually had an exact lineup of this OP Mercury, his natal Pluto, and OP Jupiter there in his 10th house. And this movie brought him into the sphere of being one of the highest paid actors of all time. And here's another share that he has with Margot Robbie. So he's got OP Venus at 2 degrees in Leo. And while he was in production, that OP Venus was at 0 degrees of Leo, and transiting Pluto was at 0 degrees Aquarius. So, you know, here we have OP Venus, and it is setting off this second 8th house axis with Pluto. Another thing that I read about when I was looking into him was that he had a really strong, close connection with his mom. And she died in 2000. And so I went and I looked, and I found that his OP series at the time was just coming into an exact conjunction with his, I mean, Oh yes, sorry. It was his OP series at the time. You don't see it in this chart, but it was coming into an exact conjunction with his natal Chiron. And his OP moon at the time was squaring those and on the cusp of the 8th house. All right. I think that is probably it on Pedro. So now we are arriving at our last chart. And clearly this one's a little bit different. It is not a human being, but a cryptocurrency. And the other thing that we're doing differently with this chart is instead of looking at an event in the past, we are actually looking at an event in the future. And, you know, as astrologers, we've been watching Uranus kind of wreck shop in Taurus and mirror some really interesting dynamics in the economic world. And we're seeing things like major banks failing and the dollar being devalued because of massive printing. And, well, we're in a recession. And at the same time, as it could only be, Uranus is bringing a whole new system, right? A new digitized system and decentralized system, which tracks, right? Because we have Pluto that's leaving Capricorn, so centralization, and going into Aquarius, decentralization. So we could expect to see, this new system really gain momentum as people learn about it. Because right now it's at a point where most of the population of the world does not understand this new system. And so it's kind of like, the creation of the internet, right? And adoption of the internet, because we can look back now and we see news broadcasters that are like, there's this thing called the internet. And, within a few years, well, everybody had learned what it is and massive adoption took place and everybody really appreciated all that it had to offer and it made life easier for human beings. And so, that is kind of what we would expect from this new economic system that's being formed. And, this is kind of why I put this chart in here, because if we front run adoption a little bit, then there could be, potentials for us to make some nice gains, right? I put a few charts of Bitcoin in the book. And, of course, Bitcoin created this system and brought us blockchain. But here we're talking about Solana. And you may or may not, understand there's basically Bitcoin, then there's Ethereum, and Bitcoin's used as a store of value, and Ethereum as a platform that things like smart contracts are run on, right? And so Solana basically does the same thing as Ethereum, but it operates differently. So, I'm wondering if we're going to see something kind of like the MySpace, Facebook scenario, right? Where MySpace came along and then that was the social network. And then Facebook came along and everyone was like, oh, what's MySpace? But who's to say? Just speculation. I guess we'll find out and see what happens. Maybe Solana is just going to level up to Ethereum. Right now, Ethereum is at about $1,400 for one, and Solana is about at 30. So there's a big gap there, and Solana could, catch up. All right. Also, a side note on this one, I am not a financial advisor, so we are simply delineating a chart and everyone's just drawing their own conclusions here, right? All right. So the first thing we should mention is that the eclipse today at 5 degrees Taurus is exactly conjunct Solana's part of fortune and 1 degree off of the natal Uranus here as well, right? This eclipse is trining OP moon, and it's sextiling and trining Solana's natal nodes as well. At the time of the eclipse, the progressed sun will be at 0 degrees in Solana's 10th house. And Solana's 10th is Aries. So now we'll be looking at an exalted sun, which will be trining Solana's ascendant. And it's also, this progressed sun is going to have transiting Jupiter, sextiling it as well. Let's see what else. We got OP Mercury. And that is sextiling sextiling OP Venus. And when we're looking here at OP Venus in the 11th house, and, of course, Venus is in rulership in Taurus, we can see that transiting Jupiter and Uranus are in conjunction with this Venus. And so there's that, right? And these are also actually trining Solana's natal Jupiter and Solana's natal Pluto. And then we can also see that OP Mars here in exaltation in Capricorn is in that trine as well, right? And actually on April 24th in 2024, when Jupiter and Uranus make their exact conjunction, that will be at 22 degrees. And so that'll be in an exact trine to natal Jupiter over here at 22 degrees and OP Mars at 22 degrees. So maybe there's some potential there for Solana. We'll have to find out. I will be throwing in on this one. And as a healthy practice, I'll be pulling out my initial investment as it starts to multiply so that there's no harm, no foul, right? The worst you can do is break even. And theoretically, if we pull profits on the way up, then we'll end up in the bonus, right? But that's just me. You do you. All right. So that concludes the presentation. Michelle, are there any questions?
Yes, there are, and thank you so much, Mercy. Thank you for walking us through so many great examples. There was a lot of research that you did on this, definitely, and that was an interesting presentation. Thank you so much. We do have some questions, and maybe the ones that I would like to address first. There are a couple of people that asked the same question, and it's about the calculation. In the beginning, you addressed this, but just to reiterate a little bit, you're essentially using the average motion of the planets to determine the progression here, and you're not changing the ascendant. So everybody's wondering, how are you calculating this? Because we don't have the software.
Right. I know. I'm actually, I'm hoping to pair with an app designer and make it available so that it's really easily accessible to everyone. And, you can find those in the book, and the book's available in the usual places, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And it's a really concise, very quick read. So, if anyone's interested, they can find the calculations there.
Okay, good. And yes, is this a technique that you discovered, or is there some evidence of it being used in ancient astrology?
That's a good question. So I looked back as far and wide as I could. And, this technique actually came as a download in meditation. And quite honestly, I didn't realize what I was looking at as I was starting to write it down. And I thought, that was the first thing that I thought, oh, maybe this is just a technique that I hadn't learned about. Maybe I was just, being guided to, hey, you need to study this technique. And so I launched into research and couldn't find it anywhere. And so that's where I was like, all right, well, I'm going to start applying this on my own chart and go back, through the days of my life. And it tracked really well. And so I was like, wow, that's interesting. If it tracks on my chart, then theoretically it should track on everybody else's. So I started diving into my family's charts and my friends' charts, and I couldn't find a chart that it did not track on. And so then I was like, all right, this really is a valid timing technique. And then I kind of put it to the test, and when I was mentioning Bitcoin's chart, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to make a couple, I made 3 predictions, and I emailed them to myself so I could timestamp them. And I was like, okay, on these 3 days, I think that there's going to be some major movement for Bitcoin. And I watched, and the first one hit exactly to the day. Watched, the second one hit exactly to the day. The third one hit exactly to the day. And that's where I was like, all right, I feel like I need to put some time into this and write about it and just share it with all of you guys, right? So, the more information we have, then the better our readings become. And so really, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing this. And well, one technical thing, you said the ascendant is stationary. Is the NC-IC axis also stationary? You just don't seem to use them in your in the progress charts.
Yes, I will say that I feel like there are some parts of this technique that we're going to figure out as we play with them, right? And so I'm really interested in feedback from what all of you find as you kind of integrate these and start playing with them, because it's not completely fleshed out at this time. So
yeah, okay. So somebody says, this is compelling research at a glance. Relevant examples for me personally captured and held my attention. What style of astrology do you practice? Evolutionary, because you're using whole sign house systems. So I'm curious if you have a traditional background, and what or who are influences or influencers for your technique and interpretations?
Well, honestly, I am a bit of an astrology mutt. I do not have a traditional background, and I have pretty much pulled from everything that's come across my eyeballs. So there's not just one, branch of astrology. There are just many that, over the last decade, I've just integrated, as we do as astrologers, like, oh, wow, this really resonates with me. I'm going to use this, and this resonates with me. And it's how we can study astrology our entire life and always be learning something new.
Yeah, and it sounds like you like to put things to the test, just trying out some techniques and hey, this works, or yeah.
Well, I have a Uranus and a Jupiter opposition in my natal chart. So
Yes. Yeah.
always gotta like
trying
ask the
out new
questions and
things.
question the answers.
Yeah, always trying out new things as well. Yeah, and we're all eternal students of astrology, I guess. It's not
For
like,
sure,
oh,
for
now
sure.
I have arrived and now I know everything. Yeah. Okay, that's great. That was a good question. Thank you. And how are you determining orbs, and why would applying versus separating aspects of OP aspects differ at all in interpretation?
Really, they don't.
Mhm.
And after like looking through, over 100 charts with this, it's sometimes we would expect something to happen on, like the applying side. But we can kind of see where, sometimes I step back, and instead of narrowing in and being like, wow, that's, usually there's a 3-degree orb, but this is happening at a 5-degree orb. For me, I like to just look at the chart as a whole. And when we're looking at the area of the chart that these things are happening in, then sometimes, those orbs get narrower or wider, depending.
Mhm. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Well, here is a question about Carl Sagan's chart. We can see how his natal Aquarian North Node along the MC axis in the 10th house is stellar, like he was meant to be a prominent astronomer.
Oh, yeah.
And knowing that, what does it look like if the OP was flipped? So would he be more of a recluse if he had the MC line in the South Node in Leo up at the top in the 10th house? So my question is the house placement. It seems it's stronger for his career with the North Node in the 10th house along the MC. So basically, to clarify, Tess wants to know the impact of the returning nodes in the OP chart.
Well, I mean, as with any charts, those returning nodes are going to make a difference. It's just a matter of, I can't say that I've specifically watched those nodes and done the research to apply that to like a lot of different charts. So I'm not sure. Maybe she can play with that in some other charts and find out.
Yes, absolutely. Get in there and find out.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's fun. Okay, so I'd love to ask, so we have the person, the event, beside the theme evolving from the first slide we looked at. What do we see with the OP planet? What kind of blend does it do of the two, you think? Do they mix the two, or do you see it like a blend of the three? I'd love to hear your view and the story for you. It's very difficult to think about it compared to the usual progressed.
I think that when we're talking about the meanings and how, energetically these all combined, it actually wouldn't be different than when we're looking at, secondary progressions, like if we are trying to see like what has become, what is evolving to each person, those are the meanings behind them are going to be very similar. What's different is the timing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yes.
It's kind of like true node versus mean node, right? And like there's the between astrologers, like there's the debate, which win is the real win? And after researching like the in progressions, true versus mean, I would say that all of the information is relevant. And it really gives us a beautiful big picture when we incorporate all of the information.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Is the OP always calculated from the natal chart, or can it be applied to the current transit in the natal chart? I'm not sure if that's even.
It's always calculated from the natal chart.
Yeah.
And we're just looking at the aspects that the transits are forming to that.
Yes, aspects to, yeah, transits from the OP. Yeah. Okay. Since it doesn't have an average planetary motion, how is the OP part of fortune and other derived lots calculated?
I explain that actually in the book, because and I give the reason for that, right? So when we're looking at, and I only actually use the part of fortune line. That is, well, in my own personal readings, I'll pull up other lots. I don't know the calculations behind those, but going off of the calculations that I could find for the part of fortune, then I figured out how to progress that.
Yeah, do it for the progressed luminaries, perhaps. Just
Yes.
looking at the progressed luminaries and then calculating the lot of fortune. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, here's a fun question. What kind of OP transits did you have when you started using this technique?
Well, that is, that's funny to ask that, because I don't know if any of you guys watched the talk that Rebecca Tarnas did in the last Nightlight series. It was really great. It was on
Jupiter,
Uranus and Jupiter conjunction. And in that, she kind of went into, looking back, like what does, an interaction between Uranus and Jupiter like kind of bring? And of course, it's what we all know as astrologers. And so I was looking at my OP Jupiter, and as soon as that OP Jupiter got within 1 degree orb of opposition to my natal Uranus is when this technique came through.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was just
that would do it. Yeah. That would do it. Okay, and then do the nodes blend the evolution of the event and person? This is somebody who asked a question. I'm a student.
Well, I think it's always all blended.
Okay, yeah. It's all blended. Good. Well, thank you so much. This was it for the questions in the Q&A. I think we've answered all of them. And then, yeah, some people in the chat are saying that they already are getting your book right now. So thank you for sharing, people are saying. And this was wonderful. Well, my question would be actually, where can people find you if they want to ask questions, or if they,
Yes.
do you have anything going on right now? So please share if you do.
Well, I would love to hear from anyone who's curious about this, and especially, if you've found something interesting. And you can email me. My website is mercyjoyastrology.com. You can, find me there. And if you want to schedule a reading where we look at these planets and your chart as well, you can do that too.
Okay, beautiful. Well, then I am just going to share my screen for a moment because I want to go back to the nightlightastrology.com webpage, where you see this orange button, register now. You can watch the replay of today's talk. It's going to change into a replay button. And then tomorrow we will have our last talk of this season about fixed stars, a practical approach. Saffron will be hosting this one with Cassandra Tyndall. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows the right time, because in Europe the clocks will change, and so this will be starting earlier for a lot of people, so please check the time. It's starting a little earlier than usual as well for Eastern time. It starts at 10 a.m. so I hope to see everybody there. And I thank you all for sharing this moment of the lunar eclipse. I think it's going to be, it's still a little bit over an hour until it's exact, I think. So, yeah, I wish everybody a magical eclipse, and let it be the absolute best for you. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again, Mercy. Thank you for everybody for contributing. Those were great questions. And we hope to see you again in the future.
Yes, thank you. Everyone
Thank
have
you
a
so
wonderful
much.
day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.